The JavaScript console in our browsers is a very powerful tool to inspect objects and a prototype chain. So let's now quickly see how we can do that in practice. So I'm first going to show you how we can inspect the object that we just created in the last lecture right here in the console. Because the console is not just to log some stuff here into our console, like we've been doing, but also to do more powerful stuff, like inspecting objects. So let's first clear this, alright? And now we simply have to write the name of our object. So you see, this is a person object, and then our name, year of birth, and job. But now if we hit this little arrow here, then we get a lot of additional information about the object. Alright, so first here we can see all the properties that we added to this object. So the job, the name, and the year of birth that we associated to this very particular object. So everything is correct here, right? Now down here we have something called the proto. And this is in fact the prototype of the John object, which is, and I'm sure you remember this, the prototype property of the person constructor. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here we have the calculate age method that we added to our prototype here, right? So here we said person prototype calculate age, and so we can see the calculate age method here in the proto, which again is John's prototype, and therefore it's the prototype property of the person function constructor. And we also have the last name property that we also added. So let's also quickly take a look at person.prototype. Okay, and let's get some more space here for our console. So we see that this is in fact the exact same thing, right? This and this. Here it looks the exact same way. And just to prove you that John's prototype is in fact the prototype property of the person, I can actually do it like this. So proto, and then let's see what this comparison operator now is going to give us. Okay, true. So all this means is that in fact the prototype of John is the prototype property of the person function constructor. But I'm sure that you know this already by now. So let's go back to our John object here. And actually I'm going to clear this and write it again. Alright. So this is the proto. Now if we look at the prototype of John, we see that there's also a prototype here, right? So let's open that. And here we see that this is the prototype property of the object constructor. So as I said right in the first lecture about the prototype chain, all of the objects are actually instances of the object, right? So let me open this again. Okay, and so here we have a bunch of methods that are associated to the prototype property of the object function constructor. So again, this one here is the prototype property of the person function constructor, and this here is the prototype property of the object function constructor. And that's because the person function constructor is in fact an instance of the object function constructor, right? And that's why we can see this whole prototype chain here, right? So as I said, this console here is really useful to visualize this prototype chain and all of the prototypes that are in it. So as we already know, we have now access to these methods here, right? And that's right to our John object. So thanks to the prototype chain on John, we can use these exact methods that are here. And now I'm going to use the hasOwnProperty method just to show it to you, because it can be useful sometimes. So we can use this method to ask basically if an object has a property or not. So we can do John dot hasOwnProperty and then job, for example. And this is true because this object has a property called job, right? Now, if we try this with the last name property, then it's going to give us false. And that is because this is not John's own property. So this method only looks for own properties. This is a property that we inherited from the prototype. It's not really John's own property. And that's why this gives false. And this method can sometimes be quite useful. And now there's another operator that I want to show you. And this one is called instance of. So I'm going to say John instance of person. And this is also like a question because it will also give us true or false. And in this case, you can probably guess that it's going to give us true. So John is of course an instance of person because we created it through the person function constructor. And this one can also be useful sometimes. Okay, and with this we inspected our John object and the prototype chain that we just created. Now there's only one more thing that I want to show you, and that is to prove you again that almost everything is an object. So let me create an array here, just like this, just a very simple one, and let's now get some information about it. So if we just hit X, not a lot is going to happen. We cannot inspect this object right now. So we need to use console.info, and now we will be able to look inside of this object. And this is what we see. So we see the elements, and then we also see this length property here, right? And do you remember this length property? We use it all the time, for example, in our loops, right? And so now you know where this actually comes from. It used to look a bit like magic, right? But of course it's not. So it's always stored right here in this array instance. And that's why we can very simply use this property. So something like this. So x.length is 3, simply because this is stored right into this array object. Alright, and it gets even better because down here we can also see the prototype of this array, which of course is the array function constructor. So this is another function constructor that is built right into JavaScript and allows us to simply build arrays. And here in its prototype property, we can see all of these methods that we have already used before, like pop and push here, right? Or we used unshift as well. So all these methods are right here in the prototype property of the array. And that's why we can use them. So did you never wonder why we could simply call the push method or something like this on all of our arrays? So now you know, it's because of the prototype chain. So all the arrays that we ever create will always have access to these methods because they are stored in their prototype. And that is how useful inheritance really is. So I hope things are really starting to make sense for you now. So let's now move on.